Good afternoon, everyone. This is John Rust on Rust on the Radio on Freedom 95, 950 AM and 95.9 FM on your radio dial, broadcasting all across the beautiful fruited plain of central Indiana. So, folks, we had a major victory this week. A data center withdrew from Franklin Township. About time. But there are still clouds in the horizon on that. So here's what's happening. This is from Jacob Stewart from the Indianapolis Star. Joe Calderon, lawyer for Google, has told leadership of Protect Franklin Township that Google intends to withdraw their rezoning petition for the data center in Indianapolis. And he later confirmed Google is withdrawing their petition. The caveat on that, the cloud on the horizon, folks, is Google still has 3 months to refile that petition in the next 3 months, rather than a year. And this is from Jacob Stewart again. They are counting on momentum of opposition dying. We have to stand up against these data centers because we see what our electricity rates are doing. You know, I'm a chicken farmer. My family, we have been farming in the egg business really since the 1930s. My grandparents started with 2 500 hen chicken houses in 1929. In that business, my father got involved and started selling eggs from those chicken houses on the Indianapolis farmers market direct to not only consumers at the farmers market, but retailers, and he soon developed a route all across Indianapolis. At one time, my family, we sold most eggs in the Indianapolis area. We still sell rivers of eggs here in Indiana. Through all that, we learned a lot that, number one, you have to produce something, one, consumers want. People want eggs. People want electricity. Number two, you have to produce those items at a cost that is reasonable and that consumers can afford. That is something my family has always strived to do. My father worked tooth and nail to stop marketing orders in the 1970s that would have increased egg prices exponentially. My father stopped that. He testified in front of the United States Senate to stop it. What's going on, folks, now with electricity, it is a very convoluted thing, but what's happened over the last really 30 years, Indiana, including the Indiana GOP establishment, has fallen into this swan song that wind is the future, solar's the future. They very well may be in the future. The problem is you're paying future electricity prices today to pay for making politicians feel good so they can thump their chests and say, oh, we're doing the right thing for quote unquote the environment, even though coal is extremely clean and has almost no effect on the environment. In fact, we'll be doing a show on that in just a couple of weeks purely on the benefits of coal. But back to these data centers and back to my family's farm, what we learned in the family egg business was you always had to build larger and larger farms that were more and more efficient to keep prices down for consumers. But bird flu has just completely decimated our flocks. You know, our farm in Jackson County is still only half full. We are repopulating it as fast as we can. There just is not enough baby chick production in the United States to repopulate the farms fast enough for how the disease is going through and wiping out farms still to this day. You know, folks, we have competition in Arizona that has completely been wiped out by bird flu. We have to get government to allow us to vaccinate to keep the price down. We're working on that. Unfortunately, the Trump administration has sort of changed its tune on that. And that is going to be another topic that we're going to be talking about in just a few weeks. But back on point on the electricity, it's the exact same thing with the egg business. We built larger and larger farms that lowered the cost of eggs to consumers. Long term, that's what we have to get back to in Indiana, is building efficient coal electricity production. We're not doing that today. What we're doing is we're importing all these data centers, and these data centers are sucking up all the electricity at a rate that is exponentially more than what our production can do to meet demand. You know, look at what happened just recently in Wyoming. There's a data center that wants to go into Wyoming that will use more electricity than every single home in the entire state of Wyoming. I am all for new business. Absolutely. I'm for new jobs. I'm for, business being constructed. Absolutely. We have to this state has to welcome new business. But the state can't be picking winners and losers, and that's key there through the Indiana Economic Development Corporation. And that's what's happening. They are picking these businesses, quote unquote businesses, that are these mega trillion-dollar corporations, Meta, Google, Amazon, that are using so much power, you're paying for it. Your electricity bill, folks, went up 9% statewide average last year. Over that 9% increase last year, this year, the rate has went up 17%, over and above the 9% increase last year. That is not a win for Indiana. We have put the cart before the horse. We have to have electricity production again in Indiana that is efficient. And we're not doing that today, pure and simple. Our Republican establishment is talking about maintaining a few coal-powered electricity plants, but the answer is to be building new coal-powered electricity. And again, in a few weeks, we're going to delve into this in a deep dive that I think will just be eye-opening on how inexpensive that electricity is. And so I'll give a little clue on this. Kentucky has a much cheaper rate of electricity than Indiana, and they get most of their energy from coal. So back to this data center today. This is from WRTV. This is from Mike Braun. It can be a win-win if data centers meet local needs. The caveat on that, folks, is local needs is what you are paying in electricity. We cannot continue to ask consumers to subsidize Mark Zuckerberg, who Jim Banks likes to clink champagne glasses with in Washington, D.C., while you sit at your kitchen table every month and see what is happening to your electricity bill. It's happening every month. You see what you're paying. This is from Kelly McCarty. Data centers consume huge amounts of electricity, causing American residential electricity bills to spike. Electricity will be allotted to these centers over you. Not only will your electricity bill go up, you will live in an era of rolling blackouts soon, all in the name of AI and your data. Well, what that really is all in the name of Mark Zuckerberg, Bezos, and Google. That's exactly what's happening. The average U.S. electricity price per kilowatt is now 19 cents per kilowatt. Folks, in 2014, it was under 14 cents. We have went up over a nickel in just a few years. It is rapidly increasing more than what the supply can hold. So we in Indiana, what our number one priority to be doing today would be? Look at Marble Hill Nuclear Power Plant that was in the process of being constructed near Madison, Indiana. Look what happened to that plant. It was in the process of being constructed, and in the end, because at that time they could not economically complete it. There wasn't the demand for electricity there is today. So folks in Indiana in the 9th District had to pay a much higher rate of electricity than anyone else in the state of Indiana because of that failed nuclear power plant. The Indianapolis Star ran an article about this, and the headline on the article was, "Nuclear Power Lays an Egg." And what they were specifically talking about was this power utility raising the rates for chicken farms like my family's and for all other consumers in southern Indiana to pay for this failed nuclear power plant. So folks, while that power plant was being built, I was going to high school at Jennings County High School, and along the way between Seymour and North Vernon on US 50 was one of the power line poles for the power lines that were going to be coming from Madison to, I guess, Indianapolis to power our great state. That power line pole was monstrous. It was phenomenal. Guess what? When the power plant stopped and they actually took the power plant down, those giant utility poles stayed in place for well over a decade. And then they finally took them down after the farmers got sick of having to farm around them all the way from Madison to where they were going. But we, as consumers of electricity, had to pay for not just that nuclear power plant that was never built, never completed, but also the power line poles. Why on earth today didn't we just save those poles and build a coal-powered plant in Madison? It's right on the river. Moving coal on the river is the cheapest form of transportation for coal, but also Madison, Indiana has a spectacular railroad. It's the Madison Railroad that runs from North Vernon to Madison. They have recently upgraded all the bridges on that line with the help of Indiana and United States taxpayers to make that line sustainable for the future. They could handle coal traffic now. So that's the conversation we need going forward in Indiana, is how to make electricity great again, how to make electricity cheap again, how to make electricity inexpensive again, because we all need electricity. So folks, when we come back, this is from Josh Hawley. Guess who rejected an invitation to appear before the United States Senate to answer the harms caused by their AI chatbots? Well, I'll give you a hint. Clinking champagne glasses with Jim Banks. That was involved. So stay tuned, folks. We'll be right back. This is John Rust on the Radio. Welcome back, folks. This is John Rust on Freedom 95. Rust on the Radio, the John Rust Show, broadcasting at 9:50 a.m. and 95.9 FM on your radio dial. Freedom 95, the right station for talk. So, folks, I'm in the studio today talking with Justin and Justin. Welcome to the studio, guys.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you for having us. It's great to be here.
So in our first segment, we were talking about data centers, and I was teasing about Josh Hawley trying to get someone to testify in front of the United States Senate. But he refused. Guess who this person was? It was Mark Zuckerberg, founder of Facebook and Meta, who, of course, had no problem censoring conservatives all during COVID. I very well remember that. And just over anything, quote unquote, conservative, you would absolutely get censored on Facebook. And so that's what the gall of Jim Banks to go and clink champagne glasses with him this year.
And a guy who, again, like suppresses conservative values.
Right.
I mean, makes
no
no sense.
Folks, the Indiana Republican Party is conservative in name only. It is an establishment government party.
I mean,
pure and simple.
Exactly. I mean, half the Indiana GOP is like former Democrats anyway, so what do you expect?
Elected. Mm-hmm. You know, I will add that caveat. Folks, the grassroots of the Republican Party in Indiana is absolutely wonderful. I go to these Lincoln Day dinners and I talk to people on the ground. They are the salt of the earth. They're the
100%.
They're people that are working to make their business succeed, to farm, and they're all doing that without the government subsidizing them or saying you're a winner or a loser. We're going to pick someone else. No, the Republicans are the party of conservatism. They're the party of individual liberty. They're the party of capitalism. Unfortunately, our Indiana GOP leadership is not. So listen to this. This is from Josh Hawley. Zuckerberg and his friends at Meta rejected my invitation to appear before the Senate and answer for the harms caused by their AI chatbots. So I gave the floor to the brave parents of chatbot victims. Thank you for revealing the ugly truth about profit-loving big tech. You know, there's nothing wrong with profit. But Hoosier taxpayers and Hoosier ratepayers should not be the ones subsidizing it. That is the key.
Exactly.
With these data centers, if a data center, like the one in Wyoming that I was talking about, there's a data center, folks, being proposed in the state of Wyoming that will use more electricity than every home built in the state of Wyoming today. The demand is outpacing the supply. You know, in the egg business, what happens is, you know, folks, to give you a little introduction to free market capitalism in the egg business, we generally make very good money one year, and we generally give it all away the next 3 years. That is just farming. It's a commodity. It is purely based on demand of consumers to what the price is in the store. We have no control over that whatsoever. But we are good shepherds of our hens, and we believe that by taking care of the hens and taking care of the folks that work with the hens, we just want to make a living and continue to contribute and continue feeding. My family's farm, we feed over 20 million people every day. So I know it's a lot different from when my grandparents started out with 1,000 chickens to now feeding over 20 million people every day. But that's something my family is extremely proud of. And I think that gives me a perspective on this, especially from the failure of the nuclear power plant at Madison Hill. That's a big deal. Mm-hmm. And so we talk about that at length on this. And you're going to hear more about that, folks, because it's a huge deal. A lot of politicians are talking about these nuclear power plants as being the next wonderful, awesome thing. Well, maybe. But they haven't been in the past in Indiana. You have to look at the track record. You have to look at the track record of coal. Indiana produces coal. It produces lots of jobs, very good paying jobs. Why aren't we encouraging that instead of trying to have one of the highest electricity costs in the nation? Look how much inexpensive electricity is in Kentucky. That should be the goal on all this. So, folks, this is from Indy Reporter on Twitter. And if you're on Twitter, I absolutely recommend following them. It's Indy_reporter_. Talking about Suzanne Jaworski, who has just been named to the nominating committee for the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission. If you all remember, just last week we were talking about her. She is the Indiana Secretary of Energy and Natural Resources. Susie Jaworski was speaking at a meeting where she talks about how companies should start suing communities if they change the local rules if the developers are late in the process. Why on earth is the Indiana GOP saying these mega corporations, the Mark Zuckerbergs and Googles of the world, should be suing your local town if they don't accept a data center or a solar farm or a wind farm? That should be up to the locals, absolutely.
In a so-called Republican proposing something as outrageous as the corporation suing the local government.
Well, I'm going to say the quiet part out loud. She said the quiet part out loud where she encouraged these corporations to sue local communities if they don't get their way. The reason our Indiana establishment GOP, not the grassroots GOP folks, two different things completely. The establishment, the people that keep 81% of Hoosiers from even running for political office, they are in the pockets of these corporations. Why on earth is Jim Banks clinking a champagne glass with Mark Zuckerberg? That says everything you need to know about our GOP in the state. The leadership, they are out of touch. Jim Banks doesn't even live in Indiana. He lives in Virginia. Real.
Virginia has 3 senators, I guess.
Well, we only have one. Todd Young, I don't think of much of his liberal voting record. For instance, he agrees with Jim Banks that career criminals should get out of prison early. I disagree with that vehemently. I'm a conservative. If you do the crime, you have to do the time. Jim Banks and Todd Young both voted for the First Step Act that released violent criminals, sex offenders, and drug dealers from prison early. Both Jim Banks and Todd Young voted for trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars of new debt while thumping their chests saying how conservative they are. What hogwash. That's a farmer term. I love that term, hogwash.
Yeah, I do. I like it too.
Because that is exactly, folks, what Jim Banks and Todd Young are taking in buckets and unfortunately throwing all over the ratepayers of Indiana, the voters of Indiana. That's what the establishment GOP is doing by making sure you can't even run for political office. If you want to be Mr. Smith and go to Washington, like I did when I ran for the U.S. Senate, the state GOP says no. People like Diego Morales and Todd Rokita fought tooth and nail to make sure 81% of Hoosiers, normal people like me, farmers, teachers, whoever that wants to contribute politically, they say, no, you're not in the club. You don't get to run for office. I say that's baloney.
100%.
I like myself, I have only ever given money my entire life to Republican candidates, but they say, well, that's not good enough. You're not part of the system. You're not part of the establishment. You're not part of the grift.
Costs.
Well, listen to this. This is from Jacob Stewart on Twitter. I also absolutely recommend following Jacob Stewart. He is J. Stewart Indy on Twitter. AES president, AES is a utility, Brandy Davis Handy, said in a letter to the Indy Star that data centers won't negatively impact existing customers because they can spread the cost of new investments over a larger amount of electricity sold. I would think Indiana's construction while in progress, quote unquote, policy refutes this. To provide electricity for new large load customers, it's highly likely AES will need to build new power plants. That's from Jacob Stewart, not from her. AES is able to pass the cost of these power plants onto existing customers before the power plant is active and before the data center is actively drawing electricity, regardless of whether or not the project comes to fruition. And again, folks, I will point to Marble Hill. I saw this firsthand. My family's farm paid for it through higher electricity costs back in the 1980s when Indiana was trying to build a nuclear power plant in Madison, Indiana, and it was stopped because of cost overruns. We still had to pay for it. We still had these massive power lines all across our beautiful farm fields from Madison all the way to Columbus. Those were up for almost a decade before they were taken down. I would have said, leave them. Let's put in a coal power plant. So, folks, listen to this. This continues on this. Don't forget that Brandy Davis Handy. Again, this is from Indy Reporter, Indy_reporter_ on Twitter. Don't forget that Brandy Davis Handy is not only the president of AES Indiana, the utility, but she is also the secretary of the Indiana Economic Development Corporation, the same IED that wants the data center to come to Indy.
Imagine that.
So, folks, when we come back, guess which former governor almost immediately after leaving office joined the board of a major quote-unquote green energy corporation. Folks, stay tuned. This is John Rust on the Radio on Freedom 95. We will be right back. Welcome back, folks. This is John Rust on the Radio on Freedom 95, broadcasting at 950 AM and 95.9 FM on your radio dial on Freedom 95, the right station for talk. So before the break, we were talking about a former governor who mysteriously joined a green energy board of directors right after leaving office, folks. Folks, it was former Governor Eric Holcomb. This is from the Indiana Capital Chronicle in an article by Casey Smith published on March 21st, 2025. Former Indiana Governor Eric Holcomb lands director job on Clean Energy Developers Board. The only thing I disagree on that headline is clean energy. You can't say wind and solar energy is clean if coal energy is what is used to back it up when there's no wind and the sun isn't shining.
Exactly. Like I remember this meme I saw years ago. It was of a electric vehicle charging station that was being powered by a diesel generator right next to it, and it's like, come on now.
Well, words matter, and I call that greenwash.
That's good. I like that.
It's like brainwashing people, but it's greenwashing, and that's what's happened in Indiana for the last 30 years, where we're all taught, and school kids are taught, oh, how wonderful wind and solar is, and how much cheaper it is. But it's baloney. It is coal is much, much cheaper, and we're going to be talking about that in a future episode, folks. And there is some revelations coming on that. I'm going to give you a little tease on that. If you Google if coal is the cheapest form of electricity produced, Google will disagree. You know why? Because they are pushing greenwash. They are trying to greenwash and say coal is bad and not as inexpensive as it really is, because they factor in stuff like CO2 being bad, and CO2 is not bad at all. But back on point for today's show. Former Indiana Governor Eric Holcomb, who, by the way, endorsed Jim Banks, who sitting with champagne glasses in Washington, D.C. with Mark Zuckerberg, joins this quote-unquote green energy board. From the article, former Indiana Governor Eric Holcomb's first role since leaving state office will be as a board director for a Philadelphia-based renewable energy developer. Doral Energies LLC announced Holcomb's board appointment on Thursday, less than 3 months after the two-term Republican governor's tenure came to an end. You know, folks, Doral Renewables, they're responsible for a lot of the solar farms in the state of Indiana. And again, I'm all for solar if it makes sense. If it doesn't require you to subsidize your neighbor's solar panel. But what's happening now in the state of Indiana is you, as the ratepayer, are having to subsidize your neighbor's solar panels. That's what's happening. That's what's happening through all these quote-unquote green energy bills in D.C. It's all about the grift. It's all about the subsidies to these large corporations to blight our land with the solar panels. So this is from that article. After 8 years in office, Holcomb passed the baton to Governor Mike Braun in January. I couldn't be more excited to join the relationship-centric team at Doral Renewables, said in a written statement. Doral's world-class vision and mission are both critically important to meet the community's needs and provide them with economic opportunities and increased energy demand. Well, he just said the quiet part out loud. Exactly. Increased energy demand by these, he didn't say that part, by these large data centers.
He conveniently left that part out.
Well, purpose. In his last year in office, Indiana electricity rates went up 9%. This year, they're up 17%. That says everything. And what does he get? He gets a cushy job on the board of directors of one of those companies.
You know, do we know of any politicians who have actually gotten a real job after leaving office? I mean, it seems like they either become lobbyists, they get on a board of directors.
You mean like Carlin, the charlatan yodeler?
Mm-hmm, that's a good point.
Who was in the Indiana state legislature, folks. And then what does he become next? A lobbyist.
Mm-hmm. But like I said, they either become a lobbyist, they get on a board of directors, they become an analyst on, it's like MSNBC. It's like, or they just flat out retire.
So, MSDNC.
Mm-hmm. So it's like I'd love if somebody could.
Well, after the stripping the state of Indiana clean of economic opportunity for regular Hoosiers who just want to build their own business, who want to build their own family, who want to have inexpensive electricity so they can live their lives, these career politician leeches run off and join the board of directors of companies they were incentivizing to come here in the first place, which led to your higher electricity costs.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a popular statement, but it's the absolute truth.
It's true.
You know, Indiana is losing out now because look how much higher our electricity rates are compared to Kentucky. You know, again, we're going to be doing a whole show on that in the future. I don't want to see Indiana going down the road to Germany. This is what from Wall Street Map. Germany is losing even more manufacturing jobs, this time to Poland. Labor costs are lower, and electricity prices in Poland are 50% lower compared to Germany. Folks, I'll tell you what the reason electricity prices are lower in Poland than they are in Germany. It's because they use coal in Poland, pure and simple. Germany has all but outlawed coal electricity production in the entire nation of Germany, including nuclear power. They've banned nuclear stations. They're looking at reopening some of those and extending them.
You know, it's crazy how you can find so many real-world examples of coal being a successful source of energy, but yet the people
coal is what built the American economy.
Exactly.
And it's efficient, very efficient.
It's very efficient, and like I say, it always produces extremely good paying jobs for coal miners, for the railroads and ships that haul it on our rivers and on our nation's rail system. It is a very positive economic impact for our nation, not just for Indiana, for everyone.
It is, but you just have these politicians that keep trying to push the Green New Scam, as I like to call it.
Well, and then as a result, look what happened in Germany. Mercedes plans to shift production from Berlin to Poland, driven by cheaper electricity prices.
I mean, like, who could have seen that coming, right? I mean, like,
Okay.
Well, I believe Indiana's a red state, folks.
Me too.
100%.
I believe we are all economic conservatives in our state. We are folks that want to buy a home, retire in that home.
I mean, that shouldn't be a whole lot to ask. That should be a pretty simple,
Very simple.
But Indiana is making that more and more difficult by our more and more increasing property taxes. Rob Kendall said this the other day, and I totally agree with this. The establishment Indiana GOP wants you, as a consumer, to have less and less. So the GOP establishment and the Indiana state government, can have more and more. The Indiana GOP establishment, they are like pigs at the trough, feeding and feeding and feeding on higher electricity prices, the fourth highest gasoline tax in the country, and now they want to have tolls for every square mile of Indiana interstate. So that, folks, that includes I-65, I-74, I-69, I-70, every mile of interstate in Indiana. The Indiana establishment, GOP, voted for lockstep to increase it. That is not a conservative value. Pure and simple. There's no planet in the galaxy that you can say bringing tolls to the state of Indiana, which already has the fourth highest gasoline tax in the country, is economically conservative. We should be making Indiana government do more with less. What unfortunately is happening is Indiana government just does more and more. And wow, when we come back, folks, we're going to get into unfortunately, a stellar example of what's happening at the local level because of the quote-unquote property tax reform. Folks, when we come back, this is John Rust on the Radio. We will be right back. Welcome back, folks. This is John Rust on Freedom 95. Rust on the Radio on the John Rust Show, broadcasting at 9:50 a.m. and 95.9 FM, all across the beautiful fruited plain of our beautiful state of Indiana. So we're talking about these data centers and Facebook and Google. Folks, listen to this. Remember Mark Zuckerberg, Jim Banks' champagne glass partner in D.C. Ugh. Facebook admits they censored anybody the Biden administration told them to do. We didn't ask any questions. Of course they did. You know why? Mark Zuckerberg is a committed leftist. I don't care what anyone says. If you censor conservatives, you're a leftist. Why is Jim Banks clinking champagne glasses with them in D.C.?
He's also a leftist.
Well, he pretends to be a conservative, but with his liberal buddies in Virginia, it means more to share on social media pictures of you with Mark Zuckerberg and champagne glasses. Folks, we're in harvest season right now in Indiana. You know what picture I would post right now today is being on a combine picking corn. You cannot lose sight of the fact that we are Hoosiers. We're from the state of Indiana. We don't live in Virginia. Again, why does Indiana only have one United States Senator? Todd Young lives here. Jim Banks does not. But he got forced on our state by the Indiana GOP with no opposition allowed. Eric Holcomb endorsed Jim Banks. You know who else endorsed Jim Banks? Jamie Knoll. He's sitting in jail right now for stealing over $3 million. He's in jail today, and he was the 9th District Republican chairman while they were busy removing me from the ballot, even though I had thousands of more signatures than Jim Banks did, including more in Jim Banks' own home district. And I think that's because the people in Jim Banks' home district know he doesn't live there anymore. He lives in Virginia.
I think that should kind of make you think about the values that the establishment Indiana GOP actually holds.
Well, this is from Breitbart,
Exactly.
from Sean Moran, September 23rd, 2025. Google admits political censorship on YouTube, promises to embrace free speech. Can you imagine that headline has to be written today in 2025 in the United States of America, that a major platform of speech in the United States is only now promising to embrace free speech? That is absolutely unbelievable to me that even has to be said. But of course it does have to be said after YouTube banned so many content providers. It happened during COVID, right and left, and it still happens today.
Like if you didn't go along with the official narrative of everything, it's like you got silenced. There wasn't like no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Like you were
They
done.
censored everything.
Well, this is from this article. Google on Tuesday promised to restore YouTube accounts that have been banned for political speech, admitting that the Biden administration pressured it to censor Americans that did not violate the company's terms of service.
It's fine,
Well,
no
the
big-
Biden administration had a war on free speech. You know, I am a free speech absolutist. I believe in the First Amendment. We have to abide by that, no matter which side. You know, you can say whatever you want about me. That's okay. You know, that's the American way. You know, it should be a contest about ideas, not about silencing other people's ideas. Well, the Indiana GOP establishment keeps getting caught with their pants down.
That they do.
So this is from Jacob Stewart again. This is Justin's over there laughing, but it's exactly what. Listen to this, folks. This is again from Jacob Stewart from the Indianapolis Star. Indiana's public retirement system was still investing over $30 million in Hong Kong, with no plans to divest, despite a state ban on investments in China. That is until one day after a column Jacob Stewart, wrote drew attention to that fact. Bravo, Jacob Stewart.
Absolutely.
There is just this pattern of the Indiana GOP establishment not only not having their pants on, they're not doing their job. You know, what are they doing?
They might be on an island somewhere too. You never know.
You never know. Yeah, you don't know what island that is where Jim Banks and Lindsey Grahamnesty are walking perhaps hand in hand. You never know.
Mm-hmm.
You
Wouldn't
never know.
surprise me.
But folks, back to the rubber meeting the road. Ron DeSantis, as always, standing out as a stellar example of conservatism. Listen to this from Ron DeSantis. The state of Florida's current budget is less than last year's, and last year's was less than the year before. Can Indiana say that? No.
No, and here's the thing.
We get billions of dollars in new taxes. Again, the Indiana establishment GOP just passed a $1 billion, with a B, billion dollar tax increase all across the state of Indiana. And what are they doing with that money? Folks, listen to this. This is from Indy_reporter_ on Twitter again. Wait, the city of Indianapolis is okay with loaning $18 million to developers, but it doesn't have the money to fix the potholes? So, folks, it's not just Indianapolis picking winners and losers by using taxpayer money to fund private projects. Listen to this. And it's, again, where I call it pigs at the trough. Listen to this. A city commission is backing the Hogsett administration's effort to salvage the long-planned redevelopment of the Gold Building downtown, which for months has been hampered by financial challenges that nearly derailed it. The city is giving local developers, Gershman Partners and CityMark, an $18 million bridge loan to avoid foreclosure. something sources told the Indiana Business Journal was near a certainty. And that's from an article by Mickey Shuey from the Indiana Business Journal published on September 19th. Again, folks, government should not be picking winners and losers. I am a firm believer that private enterprise, if they're producing a product that people want, it will make it on its own. You should not be subsidizing that with bridge loans.
And, the free market pretty much doesn't exist if you have the government coming in meddling 24/7. I mean...
Well,
it's communism
do you remember?
at that point.
Well, remember we did the property tax "quote unquote" reform, which did a very small, meager amount of, how shall we say that? It was a decrease in the amount of increase of your property taxes going up. So on average, I think most people's property taxes were going up $800 a year, and the Indiana establishment GOP pushed through a law that is giving a $300 rebate if certain conditions are met. Well, folks, remember back then, all these establishment GOP types all across the state were saying, we're going to bankrupt local communities by not allowing that. Well, it's pigs at the trough. Again, listen to this. The Fishers City Council, this is from an article by Daniel Bradley from the Indiana Business Journal. This is the article by Daniel Bradley. The headline is, Despite Tax Changes, Plan Calls for Bigger Fishers Budget. The Fishers City Council next year calls for a $203 million in total spending expenditures, which includes capital, debt service, and operating funds. It marks an increase from the city's $182 million budget in 2025. Folks, that's over $20 million higher, despite quote-unquote property tax reform going to cripple local communities. It's pigs at the trough. Fisher's budget proposal includes 5 new positions. The budget does not include staff reductions, and city employees would receive a 3% guaranteed pay raise next year. They're also going to be funding more roundabouts. And guess what, folks? 4 stop signs cost about $800 at an intersection. Roundabouts on average are $1.5 million, I believe. Wherever you see a roundabout, you know your local community is swimming in property tax money, pure and simple. They are swimming in it. Because you know who builds those roundabouts? I'm going to step on some toes here, but I don't care. Whoever is building, they are donating to those local candidates and politicians. They are donating to those local politicians. It is all about the grift for something that really isn't needed. So, folks, again, Indiana, we are raising taxes by $1 billion. We are adding tolls now, authorized for every square mile of Indiana interstates. We have the 4th highest gasoline tax in the country. Our electricity rates went up 9% last year. They're going up 17% this year, over the 9% increase last year. Welcome to Indiana, where it is just tax and spend, tax and spend.
You would think with all the taxes we pay, we'd have state-of-the-art like infrastructure and state-of-the-art everything.
The
but
roads
instead,
certainly don't look like
exactly.
that.
Instead, we have Indianapolis, which is constantly under construction, but yet there's still potholes everywhere. It's like, how does that work? Pretty much.
Well, folks, we need folks with common sense to run for political office. So I will again say,
that's not allowed.
Please, I know it's not allowed, but I have a secret that they don't want you to vote. Indiana has the lowest voter participation rate in the United States, the lowest. Please vote in your primaries. Please vote against incumbents.
Vote in the Republican primaries. I will
absolutely vote in the Republican primaries.
Gotta vote.
Find out who these candidates are and vote for the challengers.
100%.
Absolutely. So, folks, we're out of time. Thank you so much for listening. I want to close this program with my father's favorite Bible verse, Psalm 118, verse 24. This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. Folks, I will see you all again next week on the radio. This is John Rust on Freedom 95.